to get to her seat. Thank you. Senator Sanders, this is now your opportunity, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Honourable Chamber. 10 years ago, I was 19 years old. A young man, not particularly sure of what my future might unfold. I, like so many other young people my age, was not necessarily or particularly involved or aware of international affairs, current affairs. I was a teenager. I was doing what young people do, just trying to enjoy life. As far as I was concerned, Barbados was functioning and operating as a country should. No alarm bells were ringing in my head to suggest to me that in the next 9 years, the Barbados that I grew to know and love could potentially be a distant memory. There were no alarms indicating that to me. If someone had told me that Barbados would be on the financial brink, if someone had told me that in 9 years' time, Barbados would be on the brink of financial crisis, I would call them a madman. Impossible. That is some of the things that I would have referred to that person as. The reality is, Barbadians, just like myself, became so comfortable that it was inconceivable that the economic growth and activity that we were having at that time could come to a grinding halt. It was ludicrous to think that the people that we elected would embark on a sequence of events that would ensure the deterioration of all the sectors in this country, that would detrimentally impact on society at all levels. Now, we don't intend to beat a dead horse because I'm of the view that Barbadians are full aware of the nonsense that happened in this country over the last 10 years. Corruption and mismanagement of public funds is a well-discussed topic in this country. Now, having a government govern a country for 10 years in that manner, I can't blame citizens of Barbados for losing confidence in the notion of government. Can't do it. Barbadians began to lose hope for a brighter future in this country. Barbadians were no longer eager to hear what the budget would entail, because after the first 5 from the previous administration, we understood the program. We already knew what the order of the day was. We already knew that some new tax, a draconian measure, would be implemented to break the backs of ordinary people in Barbados. Barbadians simply grew accustomed to receiving a budget that was akin to a bag of potato chips. Fancy in presentation and full of air. That is how the budgets that we have received over the last 10 years have been described. This government, when it was in opposition, told the Democratic Labour Party administration what it needed to do to rescue this country. But instead, budget after budget after budget, they provided no real measures to stabilize this country, no real measures to stimulate economic growth and activity. And to add insult to injury, apart from increasing the cost of living, apart from refusing to increase the wages of public workers, apart from allowing citizens in this country to live in fear that our dollar would be devalued, The previous administration had the audacity to deprive our young people of free tertiary education. Now, I don't need to commission a study to know that if we did some research, it would display that there was a number of persons during that last decade that exhibited signs of high blood pressure during that last decade. The stress of the last administration was a significant contributing factor to the pressure that people were experiencing. Senator Haynes, it was not only just South Sample. It was not. It really has not been an easy road for our people over the last 10 years. Now, I really don't want to belabor the point of the last decade because, as I said, we are well aware of it. But the reality is that in circumstances like this, I really have no choice. Yes, we are the government of the day. Yes, the elections are over. But while governments may change with the passage of time, the damage that is created by the preceding government remains. Therefore, the government of the day has a duty to give full and frank disclosure to the Barbadian people. And they must not just be aware of the problems, they must understand the true nature and extent of those problems that the government of the day is facing. Once Barbadians are well informed, they will have a better appreciation for the estimates. They will be able to see and link between the problems and the allocation of resources and the cutting of expenditure. So it is always critical for circumstances like today with this appropriation bill to provide context. The leader of government business did just that. He did an excellent job at it. He provided the full history of all of the problems that this government, now that it is in office, has to address and rectify. Now, a number of my colleagues would have addressed a number of heads under the appropriation bill and the results of poor governance during the last administration. My presentation today will focus predominantly on the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs. Now, contrary to popular belief, the Attorney General's office is not only responsible for the Royal Barbados Police Force. So while I know that crime is a hot topic on the tongues of most people in this country, for the purposes of the appropriation bill, the funds that are budgeted for this ministry must be distributed amongst 10 departments. The Attorney General's Office and the Ministry of Legal Affairs is responsible for the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Solicitor General's Chambers, the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, the Registration Department, the Community Legal Services, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Royal Barbados Police Force, the Police Complaints Authority, the Criminal Justice Planning and Research Unit, and the Forensic Science Center. Now, with all of these departments in mind, the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2019 to 2020 were prepared to achieve the main policy objectives of reducing crime, providing services to ensure the security of our community, assisting in the elimination of the scourge of money laundering and financing of terrorism, enacting legislation to keep our laws current, and enhancing the access to justice through modernization of our justice sector. Now, it is impossible given my time constraints to be able to go deeply into all of the departments and why it is necessary to fund all of them. So I have just picked out a few that I want to mention in my presentation. The Police Complaints Authority. I have interacted with a number of people who were unaware of its existence. Persons usually tend to listen to other uninformed people and make a decision based on that information. So, based on my interactions with a number of people, I thought it was important to give some information as it relates to this particular authority because it is critical and important to maintaining balance and accountability within the police force. Now, people get the idea that the police is a law unto themselves, that the police can enforce the law and are not accountable to the law. That is not the case. The Police Complaints Authority has been funded by this ministry for years. It has been in existence for some time now. It is established to ensure that the police are held accountable for their actions. It is open to the public. If a person in the public feels as though a police officer has done something to them and it has been either abuse of power, abuse of process, whatever the situation may have been as it relates to their interaction with that police officer, they can go to the Police Complaints Authority and lay a complaint. You can complain for the police. Because in order for there to be true law and order, there have to be balance. And while I commend the police at doing their job, I am not naive to believe that often, on one or two occasions, there may be issues. Sometimes things would happen, but any person in any job makes mistakes. That's a reality. So while they have to maintain order, they also have a responsibility and accountability for their actions. So that is why the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the Office of the Attorney General has always been provided funding to this particular authority. For this financial year, for the oncoming financial year, funds have been allocated in the sum of $260,000 to ensure that that authority is supplied with enough resources and manpower to be able to carry out its duties from 2019 to 2020. And with those funds, the authority would now be able to continue its investigation into all of the complaints that were made by police, ensure that the citizens of Barbados get greater satisfaction levels as it relates to the conclusion of those investigations. And most importantly, the authority will now have financing to be able to heighten the public's awareness of its functions and services that are provided, so that persons in Barbados can become informed of its existence and utilize that source. All of the valuable components within the authority are now funded and it is there for the public to utilize. As it relates to the forensic sciences services, the Forensic Services Department has a diverse service portfolio that includes not only forensic investigations, but also toxicological and clinical monitoring. The services of this department are heavily relied on by the judicial system. It is an important arm of the judicial system. It has been used as a major tool as it relates to DNA, paternity, and a number of other scientific investigations. One of the strategic plannings and goals of this Forensic Service Department is to facilitate research and method development within the forensic field as a mechanism to ensure that there is continued growth and development of the science. However, the Forensics Services Center has been having challenges over the last 3 or 4 years. And these challenges have hindered the ability of the center to work and advance their science. So acknowledging that the department is riddled with issues, and also acknowledging that this is also a vital tool to our judicial system, provisions have been made within these estimates to address the issues that are plaguing the Forensic Services Division. As it stands, the department is in dire need of remediation and retrofitting of the building's structural defects, and there needs to be rectification of the building as it relates to some environmental issues. Addressing these issues will ensure that we are compliant with the organizational health and safety standards, as well as ensure that the expensive equipment is now capable of being operated at optimum levels. There's approximately a sum of about $500,000 has been allocated to cover the initial assessment and associated works that I mentioned as it relates to this department. Now, this department, as I stated, is a vital department to the judicial system. In this financial year, there are going to be a number of projects that will be undertaken. In the DNA section of this department, there will be projects as it relates to the validation and implementation of a CODIS database. The validation of instrumentations and methodologies is pivotal to the processing of cases for DNA profiling and conducting of paternity testing for our courts and for the general public. The validation is mandated by the FBI DNA Advisory Board, and it is an international requirement that we have the correct DNA quality systems. This project requires 3 scientists. The estimates have made provision for the professional services of these scientists. As it relates to the CODIS database, the laboratories at the center are in need of retrofitting. I understand that some of the retrofitting work has already started. Experts from law enforcement agencies, external law enforcement agencies, will have to enter our facilities and install this CODIS database software. And they will also need to be able to provide the necessary training for our personnel. Provisions have also been provided to facilitate this project. There's also the trace investigation section, which deals with the cataloging. I understand that there are 2 exercises that are currently being done within that department. The exercises relate to the method of development and validation. Cataloging, a lot of persons might not know much about the forensic field, but as it relates to cataloging, each piece of evidence that they use, each piece of fiber that they obtain has to be cataloged. We need to have a system like that in place because as it stands, for example, sand. Each beach in Barbados might very well have different components from the other. So sand at Dover Beach might not have the same components as sand at Sandy Lane Beach. So we need to have we need to have proper systems in place so that our forensic teams can be able to catalog them so that when, during their investigations, they receive evidence that may have these type of fibers on them, when they run their analysis, it would enable them to now come up with a more distinct and clear conclusion based on the results that they received. So this is also a very important tool that can be used in the law enforcement agency. The project requires 2 scientists, and they have provided, and the estimates has made provisions for the professional services of those scientists. There's one other project that I want to mention in the Forensic Services Division because this is an important tool within the judicial system that we need to capitalize on. It is the chemistry section as it relates to the study of firearm discharge residue, FDR as the abbreviation. Now, the objectives of this study is to determine the presence of FDR in the general population, which are persons that are not generally associated with high exposure to firearm discharge residue. So, in other words, people who shall be handling guns with this level of technology, they can say what they like. The evidence and the technology will be available so that it will help detect and assist law enforcement in the detection of crime. So that is also an important tool that the Forensic Services Division is embarking on that project. There are also other projects as it relates to the human resource management software, the Green Initiative project dealing with the retrofitting of the LED lighting of the Forensic Service Center. There's also work on improving the systems in relation to the tracking of all evidence. So there are a number of different projects that will be embarked on for the next financial year that provision has been made to ensure that our Forensic Services Center is operating at an optimal level to enhance the fight on crime. Now, in relation to the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, this department is responsible for research and the identification of problem factors as it relates to crime. It is also responsible for designing and implementing relevant crime prevention projects in response to the research data. Now, this department is currently working with a number of agencies within the criminal justice system under a project known as Carib Secure, which is a project to standardize the collection and analysis of criminal justice statistics. So that means that data is being collected from HMP Dodds, Government Industrial School, Probation Department, the police, Director of Public Prosecutions, and the registrar. All components of the judicial justice system, of the criminal justice system, are being engaged because the data that can be collected from those departments will assist us in understanding the core roots of our problems as it relates to crime. And later on in my presentation, I'll be able to get into how important some of that research that they have embarked on has been vital to our identification of crime and our response to it. There's also been a national task force that was set up with personnel who would now be trained from a specialized person as it relates to the methodologies of collecting quality data. As it stands, this department is currently restructuring, seeking to cut costs as it relates to, well, seeking to cut costs that technology can be used in place of. So for example, ink, paper, significant cost factors for some departments. They're now seeking to go towards the use of technology in the assistance of their research programs. Now, to ensure that this unit continues to produce robust quality research reports that are capable of withstanding local, regional, and international scrutiny, funds have been made available to them. The team needs a number of persons on board to help them in the collection of data as well as the management of the website that they will be creating in this financial year, in the next financial year. The funds will cover the payment of the specialized person who will train the volunteers and provide the methodologies on data entry, data cleaning, data analysis, all types of data-related functions. For the financial year of 2019 to 2020, there are about 7 research projects that will require data entry and data analysis services. These projects include the completion of the UN Crime Trend Survey reports for 2017 and 2018, Carib Secure Project, fear of crime and criminal victimization among residents in 6 communities across Barbados, transition from juvenile to adult offending, the evaluation of the 11+ program, the maintenance of the website that I spoke about earlier, and the evaluation of dispute resolution and conflict mediation program. These are just a list of some of the projects that they're embarking on for this financial year. And funding has been made available to ensure that they're executed, performed, and completed in this financial year. Now, 2 of the programs that are important, and I want to mention them in this honorable chamber because it stood out to me, are programs that affect at a grassroots level young people. The programs are the Boys to Men program and the Girl Talk program. These 2 programs will educate young men and young women on the aspects of masculinity or femininity which can contribute to future negative behaviors. So It's basically giving those young people the wisdom, the knowledge, and the understanding on how to interact with any adverse influences that may come their way, and how to respond to them in a way that avoids conflict. It's empowering our young people, and that is something that should be commended. Now, the Royal Barbados Police Force. This is the area that most persons are interested in. What are the police doing? Crime, all of these shootings. We need to see more police. Well, the Royal Barbados Police Force that is responsible for the repression, prevention, and investigation of crime, as well as accident prevention and investigation, has been funded for the oncoming financial year. Now, police need, amongst other things, body armor, continuous specialized training and retraining, surveillance equipment, modernized technology, and computer systems. All of these items that I have just mentioned will assist the police in their ability to enhance their ability to combat crime. I am happy to say to this honorable chamber that the provisions have been made to ensure that the police have the necessary equipment to perform their tasks. And the reason I say some of the resources that are needed is because government can only provide the tools, the equipment, the money, and the legislation needed to assist in the effort against crime. But that is not enough. The police also needs the public. People in communities need to assist the police in their efforts. A community effort in the fight against crime where people in the community work alongside the police to bring justice, law, and order back to their respective communities will be a greater resource to the police than the government can ever give them. Do not underestimate your power and your value as John public, because these are serious times. The Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit that I mentioned earlier, they produced a report on the number of victims of firearm crimes. Between 2010 and 2017, there were about 2,009 victims for firearm crimes. 2,009 for firearm crimes, victims. Another report was also done between the periods of 1989 and 2018 on the number of homicides and how many of them were in relation to gun violence, firearm violence. The report illustrated that between 1989 and 1998, there were 184 homicides, of which 42 were for firearm-related offenses. In the next decade, between 1999 to 2008, the number went to 267 homicides, with 101 being firearm-related. In the last decade, 2009 to 2018, there were 260 homicides, of which 140 involved firearms. This report clearly illustrates that there has been an increase each decade as it relates to firearm use in this country. And most appalling of all, and most appalling and startling of all, is the fact that in the last decade, the number has mushroomed and increased significantly. The statistics don't lie. There's no real data to help us determine how many firearms are actually right now in the streets in Barbados, in societies, in circulation. There's no real data that can really assist us in quantifying the number of firearms on the streets. But what I can tell you is, based on the firearms that have been confiscated by law enforcement, these are not old firearms. These firearms are modern and new. Firearms such as Glock 40s and AK-47s and all types of high-power rifles have been confiscated by the police. These are not firearms that were in Barbados in 1980 nothing. These are recent firearms that have reached our shores in this country. Barbados, we have a problem. There were 1,836 arrests for firearms between 2010 and 2017. And if that statistic alone is not appalling, 27.5% of the persons arrested did not complete secondary school. The average dropout rate was 15 years old. 15. Barbados, we have a problem. We do not have a policing problem. I am not naive to say that there might be one or two officers who might go about policing in a forceful manner. I'm not naive not to say that. But the reality is that police are working. There was recently a shooting in a shopping center, and within 48 hours, through the use of intelligence, the police was able to apprehend a suspect for the matter. Within 48 hours. Police, with two suspects in relation to the matter, police are working. Yes, we have a gun problem in Barbados, but to my mind, and this is my personal view, the bigger problem in Barbados is not the guns. It is the behavioral shift in the country. It is the mindset shift in this country where people are now glorifying violence and antisocial behavior. We have a growing culture now in Barbados where we think it's cool to call ourselves murkers. A culture where people are eager to post a gun, and not just post a gun, receive a like, numerous likes as it relates to this gun. A culture where we find it difficult to think before we react in a volatile way. Not willing to consider the consequences for our actions. Not willing to choose an alternative method to deal with the situation. Now let me give you a personal example, a personal experience of mine. When I was 23 years old, I had recently come back from studying, and I went into a nightclub. A couple of friends went out for a night out on the town. When I entered the venue, I realized that the crowd was a lot younger than I was. So I made a determination I would leave the venue. On attempting to exit the venue, I felt a tug at the back of my shirt collar, which caused me to spin around. So I spun around, and as soon as I turned, I faced dead on, eyes locked on to a gentleman who indicated to me, and these were his words: "Big man, you just stand up on my foot." I was not aware that I stood up on this gentleman's foot. I actually was passing him going through. I didn't aware of that. But he thought it was necessary to engage me in what I would call a volatile manner. Now, here I am presented with an issue where the person is half my size. I could have responded one way, or I could have responded another. But in those circumstances, rather than let embarrassment and pride determine my course of actions, I simply apologized. I said sorry, and I went about my business. But the reality is, if he had done that to another individual, he would become a statistic, or that person might be a statistic, or even both, because somebody will go to jail and somebody will be in the morgue. That's the problem that we have. That is the type of behavior that we have in this country, and in a secret. The truth is, there are actually statistics for situations just like that, or even more minor. For a wrong look, for a wrong stare, for misunderstanding, people become statistics because of those things. I mean, that's not the sort of Barbados that we want to be living in. We as a people, we have to do better. We need to show young people more love. We have to be more embracing of young people, give them the guidance that they need, help them to deal with some of the anger and rage that they have pent up inside of them. I read an article recently that said that despite young people might display their anger in public. The reality is that that anger manifested at home. That is the genesis of their anger. That is some of the problems that we have, and it's difficult to deal with because how do you know what is going on in someone's home? Some persons in the community may, majority of the times, those are the best kept secrets, what happens at home. But for the instances where these persons come out and they have programs to go into and they start to talk, you get to get a sense of what is going on in their life. That's what brings me back to community again. Upon receiving information like that, we as a people have to report it. Tell it to the relevant authority. Get persons involved to get that person help. Because if we do not, he can easily become the 27.5% statistic of young persons who are dropping out of school and committing offenses. It is a serious problem that we have. Barbados, we have a problem. We as a people, we need to invest in our social capital. Persons need to stop, think, and become the bigger person in the community, become the leader in the community. Because it's only take one person to start the war, you know. With one person, another will follow, and another will follow. But that's how crime starts. Crime, one man drop out this guy and he say he can start crime. Two people start to socialize, become idle. Another person start to socialize, become idle, and slowly they become nefarious in the ways. And more persons join and join in and join in, and that's how the culture is developed. So if we don't try to stamp it out, no. There's no telling where we'll be at 20 years from now with the new type of mindset that I'm seeing emerging from these young people. We have to invest in our social capital. More companies in Barbados need to get into the habit of giving back to communities, especially the communities that patronize those businesses, especially those ones. Don't get me wrong, I commend Corporate Barbados. Corporate Barbados does a tremendous job as it relates to their social responsibility. They do. But I also am aware that this same government reduced the tax ban for Corporate Barbados and other businesses and companies in this country. What that means is that there's an excess of profits available to some of these companies that can be used for philanthropic purposes. One luxury vehicle might be the equivalent of football, cricket, basketball, other type of sporting equipment and other type of sporting equipment and supplies for all of the communities in Barbados. All. One luxury car. We have to do better. A direct investment in a community, in a social project, in a social program, is an indirect investment in the goodwill of that company. It is an indirect investment in the security of that company. By helping others, the company is helping itself. We have to get real. Cannot only rely on government. I just explained to you, government is providing the resources to help in the law enforcement of Barbados. But the communities need to band together and assist in the effort. It must be a homogeneous effort in the fight against crime. Now, Barbados has about 280,000 people, plus, over 280,000 people. And the number of persons who are engaged in nefarious activity is significantly less. So we have over 200,000 people, and by just a wild estimation, there's less than 2,000 people, and it is not even that many. Less than 2,000 people engaged in violent crime in this country. But yet, they should feel empowered to have a stranglehold on the day-to-day runners of a country. We would sit back and let less than 1% bully the majority of Barbados. In my saying, adding up, we as a community can do better. If we turn a blind eye to the crime situation, even with the best efforts of law enforcement, we will eventually have a problem greater than the current one that we have right now. to the point that it is out of proportions, and even the law enforcement will need help. We cannot remain silent. Criminal elements become emboldened in our silence, and they continue on their path of pain, sorrow, and destruction. Let us nip this festering issue in the bud. Let us deal with the issues today. Now, deal with these issues today. The government intends to do its part. The government intends to play its part in this homogeneous effort. We recognize that if the community and the police work together in the detection of crime, that the judicial system needs to also be efficient and fit for purpose. As it stands, there are over 1,000 matters awaiting trial and indictment. As we currently have 2 criminal judges that are dedicated. We have 2 criminal judges that are dedicated to dealing with criminal justice system matters. 2, to manage 1,000 pending matters, as well as the backlog. 2 criminal judges. This current situation was untenable because it resulted in a number of persons remaining on remand or getting bail and having the chance to go and reoffend whilst being on bail. Justice must not just be done, it must seem to be done. There must be justice for the victim, and there must be justice for the accused. Notice emphasis is on accused and not criminal, it is on the accused. So in an effort to improve our judicial system, funds have been allocated to increase the number of judges. I believe the number has gone now from 8 to 13. And with two of those additional judges, they will be dedicated to dealing with criminal judicial system. So we will now have 4 judges dealing with maintaining the current caseload as well as reducing the backlog. Funds have been made available for this effort. Funds have been made available to improve the management as it relates to case management of the criminal matters, so that serious offenses can now be fast-tracked. So offenses like murder, robbery, heinous crimes can now be fast-tracked and have a trial within 6 months. So we know avoiding all these constitutional issues as it relates to persons being on remand for in our dated period of time. Gone are the days when a man could be on murder for 10 years. Those days are over. Justice must be done, and it must seem to be done. A significant and indirect impact on this new approach to the dispensation of justice means that people will now associate crime with punishment. Because before, where I can commit a firearm offense, I already know that the 2 judges that are working, it take about 7 years to get to my case. I can sit down on remand for 1 year, and after that, I can start making my application for bail. In our inordinate period of time, the judge's hands are tied, otherwise they're in breach of constitutional matters. Person is released on bail. He comes back into society, persons know that he went in for shooting at somebody or committing some type of heinous crime. And they lose sight of the fact that this person here is accused of something and is just on bail. But now, with this system, for any time he commits the offense, within a 6-month period, he can either be guilty or not guilty. So he's either coming back into society as an innocent man, or he's going away for a long time. He will become missing. That is the type of justice system that we need to reinforce in people's minds that if you commit a crime, you will get punished almost immediately. Colleagues, members of Barbados, I have been on my feet for almost an hour. The estimates for this next financial year has focused on a number of things, and I've just highlighted only a few. It has dealt with the enhancing and improving of the judicial system, the reducing of the backlog in the courts, rehabilitating our forensic center, modernizing our police force, and improving our ability to research and track current crime trends. This government has done all that it can do for the next financial year as it relates to the provisions of resources to empower all of the 10 departments under the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the Attorney General's office. The government has done its part. We have implemented legislation which helps in the fight against crime and detection of crime. All that is left now is for Barbadians, the community, to band together and try to take back this country. We have done our part, and now it's time for Barbados to do theirs. Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Mr. President, I thank you for this opportunity to speak on the appropriations bill. I guess it's rather unusual to be able to speak twice in one day. I first of all want to comment on a message which I saw in the newspaper of March the 22nd, where Minister Abrams gave a statement for World Water Day. And it was quite touching. He made, I hope that what I read could be taken as commitment to what this country wants to achieve. And it's powerful reading. I would like to suggest I'm not being heard. The voice is actually going, I'm catching the flu. So I was referring to a message for World Water Day, March the 22nd, which was published in, I read it in the Advocate newspaper. And it was written by Minister Abrams. And in that message, he gave some strong commitments to what Barbados wants to achieve with its water production and sustainability. And I think, even though it was brief, it is very worthwhile reading. The theme of World Water Day was leaving no one behind. He began with that statement and ended with it. And he pointed out that over 98% of our population has the enviable position of having potable water. But then he went on to point out that we must continue to provide water and manage the cost of water. So it was quite warming to drive up past the desal plant and observe the big solar array. As we know, one of the large costs of producing water is energy. So we seem to be providing green energy, and I hope that that will be reflected in the negotiated price of the water we're getting. And then as it came up, I had to stop because I noticed that the sewage treatment plant had installed a beautiful solar array. And I think government must be congratulated. But I wish to remind this chamber that the right to water is listed as a human right. And Minister Abrams took time to point out, and he quoted, "The right to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation as a human right that is essential for the full enjoyment of life and all human rights." And he's absolutely correct. And we must strive to maintain the quality of our water. But Mr. President, we some time ago, I think it's more than 20 years now, Parliament mandated that houses that were over a certain square footage had to put in a cistern. And there might have been some education of the populace about what you could do with that water that came from your roof. But it seems to have been left there. And maybe this is a good time to get back to revising the legislation and seeing if what Senator Drakes spoke about could be done here, whether toilets could be flushed from your cistern and whether you could wash your clothes and possibly use the water for other things. I know that in other islands, the only water supply to many houses comes from the cistern. People bathe in it, drink it, cook with it. And I've been to a couple of those establishments and a couple of those houses, and I don't think I've fallen ill. Enough said about water, Mr. President. I next want to move on to health, and I'm going to be quite brief in health. And I want to start off with our beloved QEH and the health budget. We had discussions in this chamber before about what would happen to the proceeds of the health levy. At the time, it was estimated to raise, I think it was $45 million per annum. It appears that that number might have been overestimated and there will be less money. However, it is quite clear now to all that it was not going to be simply added on to the voted monies for the QEH. And that's understandable given all of the difficulties we're having in other sectors and the need to be fiscally prudent. Mr. President, but I wish to spend a little time in saying what it means for this country. The QEH is our only tertiary care institution. Yes, we have a small hospital and some other facilities, but when you really get sick, and especially in numbers, there's only one place to go. So our expenditure in the QEH in 2017, 2018 was approximately $175 million. And there was a staggering $119 million for payment of staff. And that includes salaries and gratuities. I'm not very good at maths, but I think that's about 70% of all the money. That's an unbelievable thought. It meant, therefore, that any remaining money in the budget had to service the QH's debt and to capitalize the equipment and the building and drugs and everything else. Thankfully, with the debt restructuring, government has done the brilliant thing of taking over the debt, and the QH was given a clean slate. And we should be happy. We no longer have to worry about how you're going to pay your suppliers for your past debt. What it means is that you have to keep your books in order, and you have to stay in line. And all the old habits that you had have to change. And it means serious fiscal prudence. But it also means that if you happen to have left your suppliers unhappy with their settlement, they may not be willing to treat you the way they did. So you may well have money in your budget, but you can't get product. And I will explain why. We had a system in the past where suppliers often helped by advancing materials, expecting to be paid. We can no longer do that. We cannot ask or purchase stuff if we do not have the money. If suppliers no longer keep their warehouses filled with materials and only order when they're paid, then we will always have stockouts. And stockouts causes large problems. So until we can reach the point in time where we have stocks of our own that gives us some leeway, we will have issues with supplies. But, Mr. President, we recently saw that there is an increase in the rate for commercial water. And I believe the QH should be classed as commercial. I think it's probably one of the largest users of water in this land, from BWA, that is. Last financial year, it is still this financial year, the QH is expected to spend about $1.7 million on water alone. And I think that will rise given the new rate. And if you're going to have a cut in our budget and we have higher bills to pay, we will suffer. And I really wonder if there needs to be an accommodation made to ease some of the burden if it has not been thought of. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, relates to what will happen to our ability to spend when we have to do capital works in the QEH, supplying new equipment, replacing worn equipment, and dealing with the buildings. We can't stop doing it, otherwise the hospital wouldn't work. So if we have to finance the capital works, we have to cut something else. I listened last night, and I hope I didn't fall asleep before I heard it properly. Listened to the minister in the Well of Parliament, and he was asked a question, and he did give a commitment, but it was a very interesting commitment. He said, at this time, there are no plans to cut staff in the QEH. So I can take it that the estimated expenses for salaries will remain the same. So if we still do the capital works, we have to cut something. It only leaves supplies and services. So unless my math is totally wrong, we are going to be down by $22 million. I got interested in the budget many years ago because my cousin, my relative, was a government printer. And I recall a budget close to 2010 where the status of exempt charity was being discussed. And I wish to read the list of exempt charities, and it might have been amended, but on that list, Mr. President, is the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Board. Now, an exempt charity, Mr. President, is one which you can make a donation to, and the donation could either be in property or money. So if someone had 2 houses and they wish to give up one, they can give it to the QH and it will be valued. And that money is deducted from your total assessable income. It means, therefore, that the public, if they're not aware, and all members of Parliament can make such donations and have it deducted from their total assessable income. And that is my summary of what is in the Income Tax Act. And I am told by my learned colleagues that it is no mistake, it is real. So there might be an avenue for all Barbadians and non-Barbadians to give to the QEH as long as they have the wish to do so. The means is provided by the government and has been here for a long time. Mr. President, the QEH will survive, and the country will survive, but we have to give. And sometimes we complain when it is taken, but we've been given back a lot of it. This budget has given back. So maybe we can put our hands in our pockets and say, fine, you give me back something, let me give something to where it's needed. Incidentally, on that same list, there are organizations like the Barbados Community College, Sanitation Service Authority, and the Anglican Church. So maybe if you are accustomed to giving to the Anglican Church, you might wish this year to give it to the QEH. But I think that there is a wonderful opportunity for all to give. Mr. President, I want to address the issue of nurses. Nurses in this country. Not Senator Nurse, nurses. There is and continues to be a shortage of nurses in the QEH. And I am told that the complement is still short by 35. And the explanation offered was that our nurses, when pass the local exams, but when they do the regional exam, a large number have been failing. And I have to ask, if we have an educational institution that has the responsibility for training nurses, that should be able to work in the region, and they cannot pass the regional exam, and they know, why have they not taken steps to fix it? But worse than that, why has the government not taken steps to fix it? Why have we not set up remedial classes? Why have we not identified what the real problems are? Senator Springer alluded to the possibility that the nursing school that's connected to Ross University will be having an affiliation with our nurses, and hopefully that might solve part of the problem. But it's a glaring omission on our part. The other problem, Mr. President, relates to how rigid we have been about hiring nurses. We live in the 21st century. Persons want to be able to be flexible about their employment. And we cannot expect a nurse, and particularly a nurse of childbearing age, or even a grandmother, to work the normal shifts. She may well want to be the person who picks up her grandchildren from school at 11 o'clock. So we need to have a system where we can have flexibility of employment for the time when nurses are needed. And we also need to seriously think about what facilities we can have on site that might assist nurses by not having to worry about where their children are and the care they get. Senator Haynes, I think, spoke about this yesterday. But successive governments have come and gone and have done nothing to address it. We talk, but nothing has happened. Hopefully, as Senator Moore says, this caring government will do something. And hopefully, Mr. President, we will not have to come back to this chamber and make this appeal again. Mr. President, we have been very quiet about probably what is the single biggest thing to happen in healthcare in the last 20 years. A private sector company announced that it's going to build a retirement village and a hospital in St. George. And I do believe the Prime Minister spoke of it last year, and there's been a slight mention of it. There was a groundbreaking ceremony, I think, was it this week or last week? Last week. That project I saw was estimated to cost about $200 million in all. If we do, Mr. President, over the next couple of years, open a new hospital that's an oncology or cancer hospital and cardiovascular hospital, it would mean revolutionary changes in healthcare in Barbados. You cannot set up a modern cardiovascular hospital and cancer hospital without the best and latest equipment. And the best and latest equipment does not have to be in government to have access to it. So patients, for example, who go to the States to get radiation treatment with a linear accelerator might not, and spend foreign exchange, by the way, might not have to do so again. Patients, on the other hand, will well be coming here for medical care from the Eastern Caribbean and probably further afield. But Mr. President, we need to look at all the opportunities available to Barbadians, both as patients and potential employees and potential suppliers. Because a retirement village and a hospital will need food. It will need lots of services. And we need to get ahead of the curve and make it a serious topic for discussion in government. I am not privy to what the details of the discussions were, but I believe in medicine, it will change the face of what we're doing. The opportunity, Mr. President, to get more for less in healthcare might be coming. We've seen it, Mr. President, with the hemodialysis. We've had patients on hemodialysis in Barbados for many years, and there was a time when the Queen Elizabeth Hospital was the only facility doing hemodialysis. There have been some other smaller ones, and then there's another private company that has been doing significant amount of dialysis, including being contracted by the hospital to dialyze some of its patients. And probably, as often happens, the company is able to do it for less per patient, with as good as, and I will not venture to state whether the outcomes are better or not, but at least as good as. And I ask, if a private company can do dialysis for $48,000 a year, or $45,000 to $48,000 a year per patient, and the QEH does it for $63,000, should we not really think about what we're doing, particularly when the total dialysis budget is almost $18 million? You may ask, so why are we doing it? Well, we are a tertiary care hospital, and we are a teaching hospital. You must not forget that if you're training people, you can't train them in a vacuum. So maybe we need to have a core service and subcontract out the rest of it. It's a radical thought, and it might offend some, but it's real. And that also applies, Mr. President, to other things. And I would anticipate that if the QEH, as it stands now, does not have a linear accelerator, so we treat patients with cobalt, old technology. I anticipate that with a new cancer hospital, they will have to have at least one linear accelerator. Well, we don't need two, I don't think, in Barbados with our population size. Maybe we don't need to install one EQEH. Maybe we can purchase the service. So if we are going to get more efficient, we can't just look internally and say, well, can we keep doing it and do it for better? Maybe we have to look outside and take the position that if someone can do it better than I can, unless I can change what I do and bring it up to scratch for the same quality at a better price, maybe I should pay someone to do it. Mr. President, I'm sure that if you have dogs, you don't clean after your dogs, because the time, you have to take too much time to do it. And you're busy in here, you're busy in your practice, you're busy doing other things. We have to therefore ask ourselves if we need to do all the things we're doing. And can we pay someone to do it for a better price and possibly a better quality? And maybe within discussions about health sector reforms, that needs to be more out there. And I know that we, as doctors, often feel that we've been betrayed, that the competition is allowed to come in and get the concessions. But government also needs to make a level playing field. So if you give one party concessions, that there are rules that are laid out, that if they're applicable to other people, they get them too, and it should not be kisses by favor. And it has happened. And we've seen similar facilities, and one facility gets all the concessions, and the other facility gets none, and they're offering the same service. So we need to look at whether, when we offer concessions to one group, whether they should be applicable to all. Because at the end of the day, we're responsible for the health care of the people of this country. And we do not have bottomless pockets. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm pleased to make a contribution this evening on this Appropriation Bill 2019. And I believe that I may very well be the final speaker for the evening. And I therefore do not wish to detain us too long. And the benefit of being the last speaker, Mr. President, is that you're able to reduce your time, because persons may very well have shared some of the points that you had identified earlier, and that is actually my reality at this point. So I believe, Mr. President, that I will be able to, yes, I'll be able to reduce the presentation somewhat. But I rise, Mr. President, at this time to offer a few thoughts in light of some comments I heard from Senator Caswell yesterday. See, Senator Caswell spoke, Senator Franklin spoke yesterday, Mr. President, and he made some points in his usual animated self. And I took note of a few quotes, and these quotes prompted me, Mr. President, to locate my speech this afternoon within the context of seeking to address and put into perspective and even correct, Mr. President, some of the things that Senator Franklin said. I want to use that term I heard last year, and many of us may be familiar with it in the US of A. He gave what I call alternative facts. He gave several alternative facts. Mr. President, one of the quotes that he made, I have it here, Hansard will support me. He said that the government is doing everything to hurt civil servants. He said that the budget speech did not address poor people, did not make any attempt to take care of poor people. Mr. President, I have to correct these issues. These are alternative facts. I said in this chamber already that there are many, not necessarily him this time, but there are many who speak lies and call it free speech. But we have a responsibility when we hear these things to correct them. I am encouraged, Mr. President, by the church service I attended on Sunday. And I'll begin with this as my background. This was the 81st anniversary service, a celebratory service of the Barbados Labour Party. It was the Founders' Day service. And it was held at the Calvary Moravian Church. And there's a Reverend Adrian Smith who spoke on Sunday. And ironically enough, Mr. President, his sermon was titled, Stay the Course. Now, I doubt very much that Reverend Dr. Smith had any consultations with the Prime Minister of this country. I doubt very much he had any consultations with the organizing committee for the church service. But the fact is, he came with a title, Mr. President, that was not only relevant for the time, it was profound. I even feel that there might have been some sort of spiritual hand that guided the preparation of this sermon. Mr. President, he had three themes, three concepts that he focused on. He said that we must learn from the past, we must listen to the present, and we must look to the future. And I want to borrow these three for this short presentation this afternoon. He said we must learn from the past, we must listen to the present, and we must look to the future. Now, his theme, as I said, was stay the course. And this is exactly what our Prime Minister would have said to us in her budget presentation last Wednesday, that we have to stay the course. We have to stay the course. Now, when he said, first of all, that you must learn from the past, and he used a text from 1 Corinthians. Now the first letter to the church at Corinth was written about AD 55. And in reminding us that we must learn from the past, Paul was actually referring the church at Corinth to events that happened in 1440 BC. Now, why am I saying that, Mr. President? A letter that was written in AD 55 referenced some events in 1440 BC. And here was the author of the letter still referring his readers to these events 1,400 years ago. That tells me, Mr. President, that there are times you have to go back and look at the history of issues. You have to go back and remind persons sometimes about the past, and it has nothing to do with the length of time. I say that to suggest that whenever we stand up to remind persons of what transpired in the last 10 years, they'll say, oh, time to move on from that now. 10 years, it's been 10 months now, and you need to get on with the agenda. And you know, you hear people pontificating, I think the Prime Minister calls it atmospheric noise, saying, oh, you get on and don't look back. Mr. President, I say that if Paul could tell a whole church about events that happened 1,400 years before, and that they must still then learn from the past. I am saying 10 months after, when I speak, I will remind persons of what happened for the last decade in this country, Mr. President. I will do so.
Correct.
And the fact is, it's really only been 10 months. And I believe in miracles. I believe in miracles. I know, Mr. President, that there is no miracle that we could have done in 10 months to correct what we found that occurred in 10 years. No miracle. But the facts are that we have started the process to do so. And PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their tax newsletter on the budget, the recent budget, said, and I quote, "The measures of this government that they have already taken have boosted confidence in the economy, created a sense of hope in the population, and gone some ways towards restoring Barbados' international reputation." Now, this is an independent organization. This is not a political party, or this is not an institution that has any axe to grind. They're not influenced in any way politically, but they have looked objectively at what this administration has done in the last 10 months, and they were able to opine that these measures have boosted confidence in the economy, created a sense of hope in the population, and gone some ways towards restoring Barbados' international reputation. Mr. President, I think that the budget can be summed up in these three broad planks. One, the budget spoke to government stabilization efforts. It spoke to government's growth strategy, and it spoke to government's transformation agenda. So stabilization, growth, and transformation are the three planks, I believe, Mr. President, and I'm sure many of us in here would agree, characterize the budget presentation. And so, in the words of the goodly Reverend at Calvary Moravian, when he said that we're to learn from the past, what should we learn today? What should we learn today? Because within the first 10 months, we sought to stabilize. We had to stabilize. Many persons refer to this already. When we came, what did we find? We found, as we heard, the third highest debt in the world, 170% of GDP. We found, as many would have said, 400 million or thereabout of foreign reserves, which represented about, 5 weeks of import cover. We realized that there were about 22 downgrades, even though someone said prior, you can't downgrade yourself, or something like that, making light of the issues, right? These are the things that we came and found. We found a dollar that was close to evaluation. We all knew that. Evaluation was being talked about. And so when we came, the first order of business had to be to stabilize. Had to be stabilization. And so we looked at a debt restructuring exercise because, yes, we recognize that 80% of the country's debt was held by domestic creditors, if we can call them that. But the whole notion of a debt restructuring exercise is not new. And it was proposed time and time again to the last administration, who refused, Mr. President. Though I said in this chamber before, maybe it's worth repeating, there are about 7 countries that have gone through debt restructuring, including Barbados. About 7 countries in the CARICOM, that is, that have gone through a debt restructuring exercise. Antigua and Barbuda, 2010. Belize, 2017. Grenada's second one was 2014. Jamaica, 2013. St. Kitts and Nevis, 2011. Dominica, 2004. And Barbados in 2018. And when you look at these countries, Mr. President, all of them had a debt to GDP ratio less than Barbados at the time. Barbados was 170%. All of them had a debt to GDP ratio less than Barbados. So why should we not have done it? We had to. We had to restructure. But I am somewhat encouraged by what the history says about these countries. And what the history said about debt restructuring exercises, that beyond Belize, all of the countries that I mentioned earlier are now on a growth path. All of them. And the data also suggests that within about 3 years of a debt restructuring exercise, one can anticipate that your country will begin to grow and, and sustainably so. Within about 3 years. It was mentioned earlier that Grenada right now, and the CDB put out a report recently that shows that Grenada continues to grow exponentially. Last year it was 5.2%. And they went through their debt restructuring exercise, which began in about 2014. And they're growing at a fast rate. I therefore suggest, Mr. President, that we need not fear. We need not fear. As PricewaterhouseCoopers says, confidence is being restored because we have a prime minister and a team that have faced the issues that they found, and they're able to come up with the right strategies for this moment in time. The right strategies, unlike several programs. As a matter of fact, I lost count at one point in time with the last administration. We are under the BERT program. Last administration had growth and medium-term fiscal. Medium to long, and I don't know how many times it can be medium. But they had several medium-term strategies. The reality is that none of them worked. And within 10 months, Mr. President, we are seeing signs of growth. And I'm going to show momentarily. See, I have to correct these alternative facts and to demonstrate that this is a caring administration. This is a caring government. And we have been taking care of those who can least take care of themselves. And so our stabilization efforts within the last 10 months included helping, as I said, those who could otherwise help themselves. For years, our civil servants could not enjoy a salary increase. 5%. A 5% salary increase was offered to civil servants within the last 10 months. An administration that sought to position itself with free secondary education, even though we all know that the Barbados Labour Party is the administration that started free education in this country. But they would have associated with that. Yes, Mr. President, I'm going to give them credit for making it universal, expanding on what the Barbados Labour Party would have done. But they sought to associate themselves with this, and this is the same party that discontinued funding our young people at the University of the West Indies. They discontinued that. What did we do on assuming office, Mr. President? We reintroduced, as Senator Springer reminded us, we reintroduced this because we understood that this was one way of helping our young people to pursue their dreams, helping our young people to build those skills that can make them marketable and can make them internationally competitive. We reintroduced this. And then that vulnerable group of our pensioners. We increased non-contributory pension from $155 to 225 fortnightly. Because as our Prime Minister reminds us all the time, we are about to go on this long journey, and you want to make sure that you can at least give persons some sustenance as we proceed. So these are the things that we started in the first 10 months as a part of our stabilization efforts. And so where we are now, we are into what we call growth mode. We're turning now our attention to growth. And our budget, therefore, spoke to a number of heads I want to touch, time permitting, Mr. President, on maybe 3 of them. I want to start off talking about our commitment to taking care of people. You see, I heard the Deputy President say yesterday that he was being political. I heard Reverend Rogers say today that he was being philosophical. And I sat and I wondered, well, what should I be? And I know alternative facts. No alternative facts. I concluded that for sure. But I'm going to tell the truth. I will speak the truth. I'm told that the truth will make you free. So we started off on this growth path, and the first thing we set about to do is to take care of people, poor people. We heard from the senator yesterday, there's nothing in this for poor people. Pandering, obviously, for headlines in the media.
It worked.
Pandering, Mr. President, I would dare say, for membership. I don't know, this persistent canvassing. This persistent canvassing, I think they're about to launch their party, so maybe he's practicing, I'm not so sure. But taking care of people, what did we do? We listen, Mr. President, we listen to people. Our manifesto promises, they've been couched against the backdrop of a covenant of hope that was produced following our Rubbing Shoulders program, following people's assemblies, and these initiatives continued. And so in listening to people, we recognize the importance of putting money back in people's pockets. And so we looked at the whole tax system. Can you imagine, Mr. President, between 2011 to 2016, that the prior administration chalked up a debt of $108 million in taxpayer refunds? Can you imagine that? $108 million? And then $166 million owed to businesses? Now, how can a government that says it really cares about poor people owe in excess of $274 million to businesses and people, taxpayers in this country for 5 years and refuse to pay them? Refused to pay them, just kept promising. And each budget speech or ministerial statement, the promises will be made, oh, we're going to settle the income tax refunds, we're going to pay this, we're going to pay that. Nothing happened. But what did this administration do? Mr. President, promise made, promise kept. That's the difference. And so what we did is that we looked at the many who were owed income tax refunds for that period. And the decision was therefore made. 84% of those taxpayers that were owed amounts of $25,000 or less, and 74% owed $10,000 or less, would receive at least a cash payment of $10,000 by May in this year. By May in this year, Mr. President, $10,000. This is businesses I'm talking about here, sorry. $10,000 for businesses that are owed VAT, corporation tax. But we didn't stop there. We went further. Those now who owe the income tax refunds will receive a cash payment of $1,000. This represents some 63,000 Barbadians. 63,000 Barbadians, Mr. President, will get a check of $1,000. Do you know how many persons have suffered as a result? They're filing their tax returns every year, you know, because Barbadians are pretty disciplined, filing their tax returns every year, anticipating and expecting that when you do file for all of the taxes that you have paid, and the data suggests that you are owed a refund at least within a period of time, the acceptable period of time you will get it. No, that has not been the case. But in comes the Barbados Labour Party administration, recognizes this situation, and has made a decision within the first 10 months of office to give back those 63,000 persons at least that $1,000 check. And this will continue until all that debt, Mr. President, all that debt has been liquidated. But we didn't stop there. We looked at the whole income tax regime, and as we know, persons who earn $25,000 or less were not paying income tax, but that ban has now been raised to $35,000. $35,000. And we also recognize that those earning $75,000 or more, that we needed to help them have a little bit more money as well. And so we have reduced the tax rate. Reduced the tax rate. So effectively, by 2020, those who earn over $75,000, by 2020 will be paying 8.33% in tax. This is what a caring government does. Can you imagine someone suggesting that there's nothing in it? Alternative facts, I call it. But we did not stop there. We did not stop there. Mr. President, $35,000 and less will no longer pay income tax. Those are persons who earn $1,500 a month up to about $2,500 a month, who are there, civil servants, who I'm sure unions will be looking after to get them into their membership. That's who they are. That's who they are.
Especially the new union.
Civil servants, yes, who earn $1,500, $2,500 a month, who would wish, Mr. President, I'm sure certain union leaders will wish to have them in their unions. But those are the people that this administration is taking care of. But it didn't stop there. And I want to hastily get to this point. In 2009, Prime Minister at the time said this about an insurance company. He said, CLICO was sound, prudently managed, and well regulated. CLICO was sound, prudently managed, and well regulated. Now we all knew this to have been a lie. We all knew this to have been a lie. But this kind of statement and the behaviors that followed would have seen the opposition leader at the time bringing in a confidence motion in that administration in its handling of CLICO. And I recall a prime minister saying, oh, the no confidence motion should be punished with laughter. Laughter. But laughter is right, because they were actually laughing, in my view, at those policyholders who had the faith in that administration and that company to make the investments. They were laughing at them. But here it is now we have, Mr. President, $600 million that the previous administration would have committed the government to. And as we know, government is a continuation, is a continuum. They would have committed government $600 million to settle this CLICO issue. Mr. President, You know how much $600 million can buy? You know how many garbage trucks $600 million could buy? I heard someone in here talk about buses. You know how many buses $600 million can buy? Senator Mary just talked about the needs of the QEH. You know how much $600 million can do it for the QEH? But now we have, Mr. President, to address this $600 million commitment. And that we will. And so, our Prime Minister would have announced, Mr. President, that some $20,000 would be paid to 8,944 policyholders. And yet we don't care. $20,000 would be paid to 8,944 policyholders, and the rest will be paid over time. But this is the majority of them. And yet someone will say we don't care. We did not come in and decide to kick the can down the road. We decided that we will face whatever issues we have found, and we will fix the issues that we have found. But this Kiko debacle, in my view, should never be allowed to happen again in this country. And we need to make sure, through whatever regulatory framework that is required, that it is put in place that this does not happen again in this country. Right? And as Placid Bay would say, nobody got a day for that. Nobody got a day for that. Right? So what we're seeing from these provisions, Mr. President, is that we've looked at the tax regime, we've looked at our debt, we've restructured domestically, and the external debt is right now going through the process, and we are systematically going through what is required to address these issues, to bring the debt down, but more importantly, to honor those Barbadians, those businesses that for years this government, our government, would have owed. This is what we're seeing. This is significant in our view, Mr. President. This is significant and testimony to the fact that we care. We care. Now let me move on to two heads I want to quickly share a few thoughts on. The first one, Mr. President, is small business. Now, we've heard about the trust loan program. The fact that some $10 million has been voted annually to provide loans at lower interest rate. They're not collateralized. Let's appreciate that. They're not collateralized loans to startups, small firms, medium enterprises, etc. Now, again, this is another step in being able to enfranchise ordinary Barbadians who may have a business idea, who want to be able to turn that hobby into some commercial project, who want to monetize the particular business idea they have. They can come and access, as long as they qualify, which I, from the data, believe that every effort will be made to ensure that they can by having the right business idea and so on and so forth. But they can come and access these loans. And since inception, Mr. President, I'm told that from then until now, some 2,145 applications have been made to the trust fund. 2,145 ordinary Barbadians. Ordinary Barbadians. Now the demand is high, I'm going to admit. The demand is high. The demand is extremely high. Because of that, the fund has only been able to approve to date 1,068 of those loans, of those applications. 1,068, and have already disbursed some 680 loans. So the demand is high. But what I took note of is that these ordinary Barbadians represent Mr. President, key areas of economic activity in the country. They're in agriculture, manufacturing, retail, services, tourism, even the cultural industry, the cultural economy that we've been talking about. Ordinary Barbadians who are able to access and have been accessing up to $5,000. The data suggests that some 94% of persons to date who've received loans receive between $3,500 to $5,000 so they can put into their businesses. Now this is, in my view, social reengineering at its best. Because what you're doing is that you're saying to the ordinary person in St. Andrew, in St. Lucie, in St. Joseph, in St. Philip, Christchurch, St. John, St. Thomas, St. George, the ordinary Barbadian that has a business idea but would not necessarily be able to access credit. From the traditional financier, you can't go to the bank with that idea, they're going to laugh at you. And if they might think it is viable, it must be collateralized. So you have to go now and find some sort of security that you don't have, because if you had it in the first place, you might have been able to access the loan elsewhere. May not be a member of a credit union, which I would not be pleased about, because I think they should all join a credit union in this country, right? But the fact is, they will not ordinarily be able to access financing, but they can come with that business idea, and they get into training to help build skills. They get a technical support through the BIDC to help build capacity. And I am satisfied that those businesses, though at this point may focus on what we call the lifestyle areas, some of these firms we anticipate will be able to scale up to the next level, that they can expand not only domestically, but a percentage of them, I hope, will be able to identify projects for the export market. And out of these hundreds of persons, you may very well be able to find a business or two that can export and maximize on the various bilateral arrangements that Barbados has signed. This is significant, that they can export their goods and services. This is significant for us. But let me stick a pin to say to all those loan recipients that they must repay the loan. Because it's not a grant, and it's not a gift. It is a loan. It is a loan at a very low interest rate, and it must be repaid. Because even though the administration has committed $10 million or thereabout per annum, the fact is it is a revolving loan, and as those persons repay, I'm sure the trust fund will be able to provide seed capital for others as they come. So we don't want to disadvantage those who will come. We need them to repay the loan. It is not a gift. They need to repay the loan. But in addition to the trust fund, the budget also spoke to something that I consider to be very revolutionary, and that is providing investment instruments that businesses can access equity. Equity in their businesses. Because we do not expect that government will be able to do it all. It can't. And we know that there's some $9 billion or thereabout of savings in our financial institutions held by Barbadians. So the budget, when it spoke to the launch of certain instruments and maybe getting the junior market going, I believe it is the Financial Services Commission that is now tasked with looking at peer-to-peer financing and crowdfunding and so on. These are all instruments, Mr. President, that would allow ordinary Barbadians to invest in, and that businesses can access equity to further capitalize their projects, to scale up their business ventures. This has been missing in our market, Mr. President, for so long. We have not had this. There have been some rumblings about a junior market, but nothing has ever really taken off. I think they've not been able to find the right fit for it. But here is the time, I think, that we can do so. So I welcome that. This is needed by our business community, especially our small and medium enterprises who want now to scale up their projects, but unfortunately can't find the capital, and business, and persons rather, individuals who have money and would like to take their monies out of the banks and invest and earn a satisfactory ROI on that investment. Here now will be opportunities that ordinary Barbadians can make investments in business. I think this is revolutionary. This is good for our economy. So we are on the right track relative to building the capacity within our micro, small, and medium enterprise sector, building the capacity that these firms will not only be competitive domestically, but that they can also export. And I know that a lot of work is being done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, the foreign trade component, to strengthen the various bilateral arrangements so that businesses can access foreign markets. What are the facts? The facts are that you cannot continue to grow and expect exponential growth in a market of just 280,000 persons. It's not possible. We have the single market and single economy. Barbados, as we know, based on the quasi-cabinet arrangement within CARICOM, is the lead for the CSME. Who would have thought that? Did you know, Senator Grant, that Barbados was responsible for the CSME within the last 10 years?
Not a year.
Barely a thought.
Not at all.
Barely a thought, Mr. President, in the last 10 years about the single market and single economy. Even that has been given life within the last 10 months. When you don't have prime ministers walking around saying ever so welcome, we are for a call. You have others who not saying anything at all relative to the CSME. But now that we have a new administration with vision and vigor and life, new life has now been breathed into the single market and economy. And I've always made the point that the CSME represents an opportunity for SMEs in particular to expand their markets, to build muscle. Before we can even get to the international community, let us find markets regionally. Let us build capacity regionally. Let us establish partnerships and strategic alliances regionally. Yes, you can leapfrog your domestic and or regional market to the international community. We know that. But the CSME represents an opportunity. It's always done so for small and medium enterprises to export and expand. And now we have vigor to do so. Mr. President, Barbados has had a trade surplus with only one region. Only one region Barbados has had a trade surplus with, and that is the OECS sub-region. Only the OECS. There's no other. Every other grouping a trade deficit. But we've had a trade surplus, with the OECS. And so it represents, in my view, an opportunity for us to build capacity within the SME sector. Now, Mr. President, I want to move to another head quickly. There's a few thoughts. Because I've cut back on some of the points, Mr. President, and I want to share a little bit about transport and works. You see, this ministry is doing some great work, and unfortunately, they do not get the credit. So we're talking about the bus fares, $3.50 increase against a backdrop that the Transport Board, Mr. President, has revenues of about $25 million, an expenditure of about 65 million. So you have to seek to close the gap. But the noise out there that we're hearing do not include the fact that the last administration had already done the research and concluded that the bus fare really needed to be increased to $5.40 in order to position the Transport Board to become a viable entity. But we looked at that and felt that that was not practical at this time. That was just not possible at this time. And so $3.50 was determined at the end of the day. Now, I hold the view that public transport should be subsidized. That is my personal view. That public transport should be subsidized, and I support government's continued support for the Transport Board. And I draw, Mr. President, the example of being in a particular Caribbean country, having enjoyed some strategic partnerships. I had the opportunity to travel and worked and, deliver services, consultancy services and so on to several Caribbean countries. And I recall one day, as I was getting ready to leave a particular place, a colleague said to me, but you need to hurry and get ready because you need to get that bus by 6 o'clock. Now, coming from Barbados, that sounds strange to me. It did. It sounds strange to me, Mr. President. I said, catch the bus by 6. You mean after 6, there is no bus? So no, after 6 o'clock, there is no bus in this particular location. The facts are that transportation is not subsidized in this country. Private players, private owners are responsible for the transport service. Now, can you imagine, I remind persons all the time of what James Carville said in the 1992 campaign, Bill Clinton. He said, at the end of the day, it's the economy. It is the economy. It is all about the economy. So these countries that don't have that subsidized system, employees are at the whims and fancies of private providers who can decide when they will stop the service on a route. The route is unreliable. They can determine what time they're going to go to. Just December here, I was in a particular place, and while chatting with a worker at one of at the hotel, she remarked that she had to hurry to get the bus, and when I spotted her the next day, she said she missed it. She had to walk home. Mr. President, I asked her how far it was. She said it was about 2 hours. But she didn't mind, she laughed and joked and sang and whatever to make the time up. And that felt like a normal thing for them. But the fact is, can you imagine in 2019, us not being able to guarantee a bus service for employees here in Barbados to get them to and from work? It enhances productivity. Senator Adams will remind us all the time that when we speak about growth, productivity is one of those factors. And so a government's ability to subsidize public transport, in my view, is designed to strengthen productivity. It is designed to strengthen the competitiveness of firms as they are able to access the labor needed to produce the goods and services. And so I support, Mr. President, us having a subsidized transport system. That's the truth. I support that for Barbados. I think that is a part of the economic model for us that we should maintain, because it allows us to keep our labor, or at least one component of it, competitive, for us to provide labor to firms that they can produce goods and services. And so the Ministry of Transport and Works have, been pilloried in recent days and weeks, but they're doing a good job. They are doing a good job. This is a ministry, Mr. President, the ministry, when the ministers went in, you have various depots around the country where persons are just going and sitting on an average day because why? There's no equipment. There's no equipment to use. There's no equipment to do anything. And as good workers, I can't fault the workers. They have to turn up for work. But they don't have any equipment to do anything. You have UCAL that is supposed to have a contract to provide the maintenance service for the transport board. There too, can't get any buses to fix. Buses going elsewhere. Buses going elsewhere to be fixed at exorbitant costs. At exorbitant costs, Mr. President, right? At exorbitant costs. But the fact is, in 2019, we can refer to several roads that have been fixed. I happened to some weeks ago, when they went through Station Hill and they turned left there by the Common School. And driving, frequently you get to know the roads. And I realized that my vehicle wasn't jumping and so on. I had to really turn on my bright lights because it was night. I had to turn the lights on. So what was going on? And I realized that the roads were paved. The roads were paved. And many of us can recall that in recent weeks and months, we are seeing road works being done in this country the first time in 10 years. First time in 10 years. I was coming from church, so I have to travel a certain road, Mr. President, right? For the first time. So we need to give, I think, the transport board, and by extension the ministry responsible, a little credit. A little credit. The Prime Minister would have voted $10 million here in her earlier budget that they can buy the equipment they need. Can you imagine anything with a Bobcat? A Bobcat that the ministry was renting for thousands upon thousands of dollars a week. Can you imagine a Bobcat for thousands of dollars per week? Mr. President, I'm not even gonna go any further on that. Just to say, as Plastic Bag said, nobody got a day for that.
So you're getting some help.
Nobody got a day for that, right? So here we are as the Ministry of Transport and Works. Ministry of Transport and Works, in my view, doing a good job, trying to plug the hole relative to the transport board, fixing roads, doing all of this stuff that we have not seen in this country for the last decade. And the final point I want to make here is that the Transport Authority, which is an arm within this ministry, gave a report recently that says that within September 2018, and January 2019, there were 1,431 complaints about PSVs in this country. I'll give you that again, Mr. President. Between September 2018 and January 2019, there were 1,431 complaints about PSVs, just in that short 4-month period. 1,431 complaints. Now, why did I highlight this afternoon? The fact is that the Transport Board only covers 20% really of the market, the public transport sector in this country. Only 20%. The private vehicles, the private service vehicles, they're right now catered to about 80% of the market. The facts are they too will benefit from the $3.50 bus fare. But I am calling on the ministry to put appropriate regulations in place to bring some order to our roads. We need order on our roads, Mr. President. We need order on our roads. We have too many of our SUVs going off-route, playing loud music. Mr. President, if someone has said it to me, I may not have a belief, but I saw myself, guys sipping out of the vehicles, going into the shop, buying alcoholic beverages. Buying alcoholic beverages. I'm saying that this must stop. They are going to benefit from this increase, but the Transport Authority and or the Ministry of Transport need to put tighter regulations in place to bring order to our society. Barbados is an orderly society. So we need to make sure that our roads are brought back into order. And so as Reverend Rogers is not here, he talked about getting back on course. If there's one thing that needs to be back on course, is our public transport system. We need that on course. We need some order there. I am sitting at home and someone sent me a video, many in this chamber may have seen it, of a minibus driver. I said driver because he was behind the wheel and he got out. And he literally stopped the van to engage in some sort of confrontation with another person. And people are actually in the van, Mr. President, sitting there, and you can hear the noise in the background. Come and get, come back to the van and take me home. Another person, please, I getting off this van and all. That's the kind of thing that our commuters have to endure. We need order. That is the point. We need order on our roads. So I support the legislation that is to come to do just that. And I support whatever policies and regulations the Transport Authority and or the Ministry of Transport and Works will put in place to help bring some order to our roads. The point was made that because the bus fare was only $2, that they had to be fighting amongst themselves and it was highly competitive and all that. That was the point that was made. They have $3.50 now. So maybe that will reduce. That will reduce, Mr. President, this need to fight with one another for routes and so on. We need to bring order to our roads. Now, my last point, Mr. President. Not here, I'm gonna leave him. I told him already to be aware of the sword of Damocles. Be aware of the sword of Damocles. He knows what I mean. Mr. President, I started off by saying that Reverend Smith spoke on Sunday, and we can place our budget within that context. Stabilization, I spoke to that. Growth, the small business sector, transport, etc. We're seeing some growth there. But I want now to quickly look at the last point of transformation. Transformation. Because Reverend Smith says we must also look to the future. You learn from the past, you listen to the present, and you look to the future. And so when we look to the future, I think that the budget as presented last week spoke to some bold initiatives. The budget was comprehensive, it was balanced, took care of our people, especially our poor people, putting money back in their pockets. But it was also bold in its outlook. A number of initiatives have been identified. I heard Senator Nurse speak yesterday that he didn't hear anything about agriculture. Whereas I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now, I would suggest that he considers the medical cannabis industry that the Prime Minister spoke of in the budget, and also the work that has been discussed by the substantive Minister for Agriculture. relative to greenhouse projects and so on. We think we've seen some stuff in the press, but there's a lot being promised relative to agriculture. But that's not my substantive point. The substantive point relative to transformation, Mr. President, has to do with two things. One, the use of technology. I believe that Minister McConney will address this at length on Friday. And when she does, I want to hear of the plans relative to KIPO. Now, KIPO, Mr. President, as I stand here, KIPO is a challenge. KIPO is a challenge. It's a challenge for many an investor who wants to come and set up their companies. Sorry? Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. I happened to be sitting on a board recently and saw a letter that came in from an investor. Investor, Mr. President, about to bring millions to Barbados for a particular agricultural project, who, after getting the runaround at KIPO, they go there, they send their staff, they go present all the documents, they return on the date that they are requested to, speak to maybe same person or another, they can't find the documents, they go, they bring documents back again, and after going through this for several times, they wrote to the board and said, no, we are going to advise our client to discontinue this effort. Can you imagine that? Now, if I had not, as I stand here this afternoon, if I had not experienced for myself similar issues, I may be a little more lenient, but I've experienced it, Mr. President, and I know of many others who have. So hey, you just want to register a business name? You just want to register a business name? You just want to maybe incorporate a business name? And you get the persistent runaround. This, Mr. President, is causing money for this country. This is causing us to lose money, causing us to lose investment. And not only from those who will come into our shores, but domestically, people here who want to set up business, who want to do business here, who want to expand. They are constantly experiencing challenges with this organization. So I hope that as we look at new technology and moving our country to be in a digital economy, this is also one of those departments that is considered, because it needs to be addressed. But in addition to that, as we look to the future, I welcome the announcement of the commercial court. I welcome the announcement of the commercial court. The Prime Minister mentioned the self-financing commercial court. I welcome it. And for those naysayers who talk about, oh, there's no growth, I don't know. I find that people can be so disingenuous for their own selfish motives. So disingenuous. All these things are designed to do just that. We've been coming here, we looked at the town and country planning legislation and so many other pieces that are designed to do just that, create that enabling environment. But what does the data say about how we enforce contracts and deal with contracting in this country? Because this to me justifies the Prime Minister's pronouncement recently. And this is the Doing Business Report of 2018, which, by the way, Barbados ranked 129 out of 190 countries. We heard this before. And this is from moving in 2013 at the position of number 88. In 2013, we were number 88. Here in 2018, we were 129 out of 190 countries, whereas Jamaica was 75, St. Lucia 93, Trinidad and Tobago 105, Barbados 129th out of 190 countries. But the point relative to legal rights in Barbados enforcing contracts, I think, Mr. President, gives justification for this commercial court. Because the data says from the Doing Business report that Barbados ranked 170 out of 190 economies relative to its ability to enforce contracts. Mr. President, yourself and the Deputy President as attorneys, you're not heartened by that statistic, I'm sure. 170 out of 190 countries. But it didn't stop there. When looking at the time it took to complete a legal matter, Barbados scored 1,340 days. In other words, it took 1,340 days on average to complete a legal matter. Mr. President, you know what is the Latin American and Caribbean average? 768 days. 768 days. You know what is the OECD average? 582.4 days. And Barbados is taking 1,340. Now, when any investor looks at this data, and I think the last administration sought to rubbish these reports, dismiss them. One minister even said that, oh, the data is incorrect. The facts are that you have many investors who look at these statistics. Look at these statistics. But they stop there. We're saying, I take the time from the president. So it takes time to enforce contracts. And out of a score of 100, where all the other Caribbean countries are doing relatively well, Barbados only got 38 out of 100. St. Lucia, 59.67. Grenada, 59.33. The regional average was 53.39. Jamaica got 51.87. Barbados, a paltry 38 out of 100. Mr. President, these statistics tell us that we need that commercial court. We need to go in this direction because we have to address this matter. We have to put it back. We have to give our investors, not only investors, mind you, domestically as well. Our firms operating here need to know that they can have whatever matter it is adjudicated on, determined within a timely manner. So this is not only for investors, this is also to give confidence to our domestic market that we are providing an enabling environment for them to do business here. This is about doing business better. So when our Prime Minister announced commercial court, step in the right direction. Mr. President, time doesn't permit me to look at the issues, social issues. I think Senator Cummings and others may do so on Friday, right? But it is important as I wrap up to situate all of this within the context of a balanced program by this administration, a comprehensive program by this administration. This is not a piecemeal effort at fixing our economy. No, it's not. This is a holistic agenda at ensuring that as we grow, that we also transform, because we have to do business differently. We have to make sure that we use the technology. Technology, we say it in all of our marketing classes and our business classes, it's a game changer. It's really the game changer for how business is done. So we have to use it. And government, well, it's not necessarily leading the way. Government is not leading the way on this, but government must be a part of it. Because the private sector has been using technology now for a while, but government ability to also transform its departments and its ministries and so on. That you no longer have to go to the Pine. And despite who I may know, I went to the Pine to renew my driver's license. I just texted a colleague, said, I don't want any help from you, but I'm just letting you know I'm experiencing this. I took an hour and some. And they refused to go and call anyone. No, I took an hour and some. An hour and some just to get a driver's license renewed. Time is money, Mr. President. Time is money. So our effort at transforming and bringing our economy into that digital environment, I think, will help relative to how we do business. So as I close, Mr. President, as I close, I want to leave this text with us. You see, what we're going through now reminds me so much of a young cupbearer named Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a part of the political class. Yes, he worked with the king, but he was a Jew. And he experienced what it was to be living in one place and hearing the news of the destruction of his country. And for love of country, he got permission from the king to go back to Jerusalem. And he was able to get all the resources he needed to mobilize his comrades to help to rebuild the walls of the city. And like any situation, there were naysayers. There were those who would come and criticize. You know, there are people who don't want you to succeed. Mm-hmm. There are people who don't want the good things to happen in any situation. There are people living like that. Mm-hmm. Was it that thousands of years ago, and it is so now? Yeah. There are people who do not want you to succeed. There are people who would love for Barbados to stay in the place it was at. That's right. Can you imagine that? There are those. The only thing that I would say on that before I finish the story is that, Mr. President, there is one name for thousands of years that no mother or father has ever given a child. For thousands of years, no mother or father has ever called their son Judas. Judas. Since 2,000 years ago, after Judas did what he did, there was no son named Judas since then. No mother or father who ever sought any comfort in that name because of what he did. So I'll say to those who will be heckling, just remember, nobody likes a Judas. Nobody likes a Judas. But here's Nehemiah mobilizing his comrades to rebuild the walls. Up comes Sanballat and Tobiah, who were also Jews, who you would have thought, Mr. President, would have welcomed the assistance to get the country going again. They didn't. They actually tried their best to deter, to destroy. They tried their best, but they could not succeed. And at one time, when Nehemiah was doing his work, they sent message to come down from where you were into the plains and join us. And as I close, I leave this comment. As Nehemiah sent message back to Sanballat and Tobiah, he said, I am doing a good work. I am doing a great work, so I cannot come down. I therefore say to this motley administration, you are doing a good work. I say to the people of Barbados, we are doing a good work. All of our investors, people looking on, international partners, they all say it and they say we are doing a good work. And because of that, Mr. President, we will not come down. I'm obliged.
Friday at 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
Mr. President, that concludes government's business for the day. I beg to move that the Senate do now be suspended until Friday, March 29th at 10 a.m.
Question is that Senate be now suspended until Friday, March 29th, 28th, for my advice, at 10 a.m. Sure that you're not. Yes, I'm advised that the correct date is the 29th. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The Senate is now suspended until Friday next at 10 a.m.